Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are doing a deck tech for Daretti Rocketeer Engineer. Daretti is a 5 mana star 5 with power equal to the greatest mana value among artifacts you control, and then whenever he enters or attacks, choose target artifact card in your graveyard. You may sacrifice an artifact, and if you do, return the chosen card to the battlefield. This is some mono red artifact Reanimate. So why play Daretti? Because he enters and attacks to reanimate big artifacts. That's kind of the whole goal of the deck, is we want to turn tokens into these big, massive artifact creatures and value to just kind of punish our opponents and just beat them down as quickly as possible. He also has very high commander kill potential because we have very high CMC artifacts that ideally we reanimate for free. So Daretti very well could be like a 12/5 for 5 mana, which is really neat. And then since there are so many artifacts in the history of Magic, the deck build is so flexible and it's so open that there's just, you can really add anything you want to it. So here's the game plan. We don't need Daretti to win. Like, we rely on it. Like, he massively helps us out, right? But at the end of the day, we're still just big artifacts. Like, we can still win with just mono red big artifacts. Like, that's still fine. He makes it a lot better, but like, if he's uncastable or like he can't attack or like whatever, it's not the end of the world. So early game, we want to get down rocks and ramp. We just want to fill our grave with big artifacts through a lot of like looting and rummaging effect, which are just like discard cards and then draw cards, or draw a card and then discard cards to fill our grave really quick while also giving ourselves like hand advantage. We also then mid game just play Daretti, start reanimating since he has that enter ability. It's very good. And then late game, we want to continue to cycle and loop cards in our graveyards to win through massive beats. The way we do this is there are a lot of cards in the deck, artifacts in the deck, that either when they enter, they make a lot of tokens, or when they die, they make a lot of tokens. The goal of this deck is to get rid of those tokens to reanimate another big guy, or then sacrifice that big guy if he does die, or from natural causes, or whatever, who then replaces himself with those tokens that we can then sacrifice to loop with Daretti. You'll see in a second. Channel and deck stuff. The deck costs about $480 at the making of the video. There's like a lot of cards you could cut. Cut Ancient Tomb. Ancient Tomb's in this deck list. Save yourself like $70 or whatever. Like, there's a lot of cards you can make this really cheap. Get the cards you need from the link down below. And then, as always, remember to like, comment, and especially subscribe to the channel. So let's talk about the one and only Planeswalker. We got Big Stink Daretti, Scrap Savant himself. Daretti he's the man. He's literally like probably one of the better mono red reanimate commanders for artifacts. Maybe better than this Daretti, but who knows? Who knows? So what he does is he has a 4 mana loyalty, or 4 mana start with a 3 mana loyalty. Plus to him, discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards, which is great for filling the grave and then just fixing our hand. Sacrifice an artifact. If you do, return target artifact card from our graveyard to the field, which is literally creature Daretti's enter and attack. And then if we get his -10, like if we win the game, like we win the game. Like if we get his -10, it's going to be very, very hard to beat us. I will say credit where credit is due. This deck list that I am offering is very heavily based off one of my buddy Alex's deck, who has this Daretti as his commander. So the commanders work very similar to one another. But yeah, I'm gonna put a link to his deck in the description down below. Also check that out. It's super good and it's super tuned. It's super annoying too. Let's talk about creatures. Ancient Stone Idol, 10 mana, 12/12. Flash the attacking creature costs. Sorry, this spell costs 1 less for each attacking creature. Trample. When it dies, create a 6/12 colorless construct artifact creature token with trample. So here's what I meant earlier by the loop. We want to either just sacrifice like a little token to play Ancient Stone Idol from our hand, just flash him in. If he costs less, we can reanimate him. We either want to reanimate him through Daretti, or we just want to whip him out naturally because he'll cost heavily reduced. When I talked about the looping earlier, what I meant was when Ancient Stone Idol dies, we make a 6/12, that's an artifact. We can then sacrifice that 6/12 to bring back Ancient Stone Idol. And then when Ancient Stone Idol dies, we get the 6/12, and then we bring back the big guy himself, right? So for a lot of these cards, I'm going to talk about this does the loop ability without having to re-explain it. So this kind of is the loop ability. Some will die and make tokens. Some will enter and make tokens. but it's really good. Ancient Stone Idol also just being a heavily reduced and never costing 10 mana ideally is really good, and this will make Daretti, like what I was saying earlier, a 10-5. Like, that's no joke. Anger is an absolute must in this deck, an absolute requirement. It is a haste 2/2 when he's in your graveyard and you control a mountain. Creatures you control have haste. Absolutely pivotal because we want to dump him in the grave as soon as possible. And this also lets us on turn 5, like, or whatever, when we play Daretti, to have him enter, do a reanimate, and then attack, and then do a reanimate. So very important that we can always have our guys be hasty. Kinetic Scarab Swarm is also pretty good. It's kind of like a looping guy, but not as, like, quote-unquote infinite. This one does have a limit. Flying 1/1 for 4, but whenever it enters the battlefield, exile target player's graveyard, and for each artifact or land exiled, we make a colorless bug artifact creature token with flying. So this is like one that's kind of like, these are the kind of tokens we want to sacrifice, right? Like, we want to sacrifice 1/1 flyers to bring back 12/12 tramplers. That's kind of the goal with this deck. And it's also really good because this is good grave hate. Kinetic Spider. Whenever another non-token artifact, creature, or vehicle enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. I'll tell you, we don't have any vehicles, but it's really nice just whenever we have one of our non-tokens enter. Like, really, whenever we do a loop or just casually play our deck, we're probably going to be drawing like an extra 2 cards a turn or so. Kinetic Tomb Sentinel is very good. Vigilance 4/3 for 4. When he enters the battlefield from a graveyard, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent. It has Unearth, but we're not really going to worry about that because it's going to be entering from the graveyard when we loop it with Daretti. So it's really good just to have exile removal on non-lands just as an option to reanimate. Cityscape Leveler is kind of the same thing in like a weird way. So he's an 8/8 with trample. Whenever you cast it and whenever he attacks, destroy up to 1 target non-land, and they make a Power Stone, which no one really wants a Power Stone. Not going to do much for a lot of decks. But yeah, just being able to reanimate this guy early game, maybe even like turn 4 or 5 whenever we get to ready down, whip him into play. If he has haste, great. If not, he's still an 8/8 threat that's absolutely terrifying. And then when we attack, we just start blowing up our opponent's best things. And they have to deal with this 8/8 Trampler. And at worst, the Daretti's now an 8/5. Combustible Gearhulk is an absolute all-star in this deck. 6/6, first strike, 6 mana. Let's run through it. When he enters the battlefield, target opponent may either have us draw 3 cards, which is fantastic, or we mill 3 cards, which is also really good, and then Combustible Gearhulk deals damage equal to the total CMC of the milled cards, right? Let's use this screen as an example. If we mill a 6, a 7, and a 6, 12, 19, someone's just taken 19 damage. Like, when opponents know that we have such a high CMC deck, they're really, really going to be hesitant about being like, yeah, I'd rather you just like draw 3 rather than me take like 20. Like, the threat to take 20 damage is like very, very real, is what I'm trying to say. So it's either we fill our grave and they take 20, which is great, or we draw 3 cards, which is great, and then we can loop them, which is also great. Cyberman Squadron is very, very gross, and honestly a very good example to use with Combustible Gearhulk and Duplicant, but we'll talk about that in a second. Non-legendary artifact creatures you control have Myriad. Myriad is basically whenever you attack an opponent, whenever you attack a player, you make a token copy of, I guess, a non-legendary artifact creature in this case, attacking each other opponent. So I build these decks in the mind of having 3 opponents, a pod of 4. So in a good universe, we attack with Cyberman Squadron, and we don't even have to attack. We just attack with Combustible Gearhulk because he has Myriad. We now make 3 more copies of Combustible Gearhulk, and then we do his Enter the Battlefield ability 3 times. Like, we're either drawing 9 or someone's dead. Like, there's really no in between. Also works really well for Duplicant. Duplicant, when he enters the battlefield, exile target non-token creature, and then his PT is basically equal to the, he basically just becomes like a copy. Not a copy, but power and toughness of that creature. Not important, but the important part is when he enters, you just exile a non-token creature. So with Cyberman Squadron, again, we get 3 copies of Duplicant, we exile 3 non-token creatures, we eat commanders, we eat utility, whatever. They're gone forever. And it's just really, really good. So Cyberman Squadron can go kind of nuts with most cards in our deck because we don't have a ton of legendary artifact creatures. Duplicant also really good. We can loop it. We eat stuff. He's great. Feldon of the Third Path is a good card. We just pay 3, tap them, make a token that's a copy of a creature in our graveyard. So any creature, could be an artifact, could be not, whatever. It gets haste, and then sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. While I have the sacrifice ability right here, I do want to point out how very important it is in this deck to have sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step, because a lot of these abilities say exile at the beginning of the next end step, and we have a lot of death triggers. So we have like a lot, like Ancient Stone Guardian or whatever his name was, right? Like he dies and he makes that 6/6. If he exiles, we don't get that 6/6. So like if we use like Ancient Stone Guardian or Idol or whatever his name is, and Feldon as an example, we reanimate it from the grave, we attack for 12/12 with trample, and then ultimately at the end of our turn, it dies, we replace it with a 6/12. So that's why the sacrifice is important. It's just good that we can just reanimate any creature from our grave and get a cheeky little smack in. He also has got sad lore. Look up his lore, it's sad. Goblin Engineer is really good. Just whenever he enters the battlefield, search your deck for an artifact card, put it into our grave. Great. That's kind of the reason we're running it. However, we can also do pay a red and tap it and sack an artifact to return target artifact with CMC 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield. Which could be really good later on if we just like want to be like, I don't know, sacrifice a token, like a creature token, and get like a soul ring or whatever, or like an arcane signet. Like, you know, you guys know what I'm trying to say. We're really running them for the tutor. Goblin Welder, he's a goblin artificer. Same thing with Goblin Engineer. I will say, Daretti is also a goblin artificer, right? We'll talk about that in a second, but there's a lot of artificers in the deck, right? That's a good point. I'll mention that later. I'm getting ahead of myself. Goblin Welder. Tap it, choose target artifact a player controls and target artifact in that player's graveyard. If both targets are still legal as this ability resolves, that player simultaneously sacrifices the artifact and returns the artifact card from their graveyard to the battlefield. We basically make someone else sack their artifact and we reanimate an artifact from a grave, which could be good, or it could be bad. For us, ideally, it's good because we're sacrificing like a 1/1 spider we get off kinetic, the kinetic guy. And that's good, or we sacrifice like a treasure token and we get back a big thing. However, what we can do, if our opponent has a big scary artifact and they have an artifact in their grave, we can make them sacrifice it because it's choose target artifact a player controls and target artifact in their graveyard. So we're mainly using it for us, but we can do it to others. Junk Diver is really good. It's just like another like great sacrifice card we use with Daretti, right? Junk Diver, when it dies, return target artifact card from our graveyard to our hand. Great. So we're already doing a reanimate and we're getting a death trigger to ideally get back maybe another smaller artifact. Karin's Legacy Reforged, power and toughness equal to the greatest mana value among artifacts you control. At very worst, he's a 5/5 because he's 5. At the beginning of your upkeep, add a colorless for each artifact you control, and this mana can't be spent to cast non-artifact spells, and until end of turn, we don't lose mana as the steps and phases continue. Really, really good because we have a lot of big mana artifacts in this deck, and we're mostly an artifact deck, so it's really, we get a lot of free mana for cards, which is good. Kiki-Jiki Mirror Breaker, haste, tap him, super infamous dude. Tap him, put a token that's a copy of target non-legendary creature onto the battlefield. That token has haste, sack it at the beginning of the next end step. Again, sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step is important. In a bad example, I guess, we could look at Junk Diver. We tap Kiki-Jiki, make a token that's a copy of Junk Diver. We could even use it defensively too, because like you can do it at like basically instant speed. Say someone's attacking us, right? We tap Kiki-Jiki, make a token that's a copy of Junk Diver. Use Junk Diver, block, Junk Diver dies, and then we get the artifact card from our grave because it has the dice trigger, or we don't block and let's say we attack, on our turn, we sacrifice it anyway to get the artifact back. So again, the dice trigger is really a bit good, and Kiki-Jiki has way better targets than Junk Diver. Kuldotha Forge Master lets us sacrifice 3 artifacts and tutor for an artifact card from our deck straight to the field. Sack 3, tutor any artifact. It's really good, and we could do it at instant speed, so it's really great. Metalwork Colossus is fantastic because he never costs 11. However, it'll make Daretti an 11/5. He costs X less to cast, where X is a total CMC of non-creature artifacts you control. And then we can sack 2 artifacts, return him from our grave to the hand. We're probably not going to do the bottom ability. Ideally, we can cheese him out for basically no mana from our hand, or we loop him. And I know he doesn't have like any special abilities, but like if you get a 10/10 swinging at you every turn, like that'll wear you down. Meteor Golem is great. We reanimate him however we need to. Pop a non-land and opponent controls. He's just good removal. And we can do it like forever. Mere Battlesphere is one of those ones that we can loop that doesn't have a die ability, has like the enter ability. So in a cool world, we have Mere Battlesphere. He enters, makes 4 dudes. If someone kills Mere Battlesphere, we can just sacrifice one of the Mere he makes to bring him right back, and then make 4 more Mere. And then whenever he attacks, you may tap X untapped Mere you control, and if you do, he gets +X/+O until end of turn and deals X damage to target player or planeswalker it's attacking. So at the very worst, he can just laser someone for 4 right off the bat, which isn't too bad. But I mean, Mere Battlesphere is really just to have him enter and make 4 token artifacts. Mere Retriever's great when he's put into a graveyard from play. Return another target artifact card from our graveyard to our hand. It's just Junk Diver, but not flying. Phyrexian Triniform is a big stink in the deck, I'll tell you. When he dies, create 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature tokens. Like, this is the kind of card that we want to copy with Kiki Jiki, right? We want to swing in with a 9/9 and then get 3/3/3s on the backlash. So again, Phyrexian Triniform, the idea of the deck, again, is we want to loop him. We want to attack. If he dies naturally, who cares? He replaces himself with 3/3/3s, and then we can sacrifice one of those 3/3s to get back our 9/9. He has Encore to exile him from our graveyard and basically give him haste and myriad. But we could do that in a pinch. It's not a bad move, but ideally we don't want to exile cards from our grave, so we can just keep looping them over and over. Platinum Empyrean is a card. It's just a magic card. Is it good in this deck? Yes. Could other cards be better than it in this deck? Also yes. I think it's silly, so I decided to add it into the list. 8 mana, 8/8, your life total can't change. It's really good if our opponent has like a lot of like creature tokens or whatever, or like they have way more attackers than we have blockers, or if someone does a big mass drain effect, or any kind of like Nekusar type decks that ping everyone, or like a group slug or whatever. He's good. Like, he's good. He's great. Is he the best? Again, no. Is he fun? He's fun. Scrap Trawler is just like a better version of Junk Diver, and maybe not a better version, but he's an alternate version of Junk Diver and Mere Retriever. Whenever he or another artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand target artifact with lesser CMC. Let's use Solemn as an example. Like, if Platinum Empyrean dies and Solemn is in our graveyard, we just get Solemn back if Scrap Trawler's on the field to our hand. So again, it's just kind of, it's not like looping, but it's helping us get like our smaller guys back. Solemn's great. Enters the battlefield. Search our deck for a basic mountain. Put it into play tapped. Great. Later, if we want to block with him and he dies, we'll draw a card. If we like want to loop him with Daretti and sacrifice him, draw a card. He's just great. He's like great all around. Copy him with Kiki Jiki. Who cares? Suchi Cave Guard. Vigilance 8/8 for 8 with Ward 4. I'll tell you, Ward 4 says hexproof. Whenever he dies, add 8 colorless, and then you don't lose mana as steps and phases end. That's just really good. He's a great beater. If he dies, we can sacrifice him on our turn to Daretti, just if we just want to cast a big guy from our hand and reanimate like another big guy from our grave. It's kind of like a 2-for-1 with that. Threefold Thunder Hulk is probably the only time I'm going to pronounce his name right. He's a 7 mana 0/0, which is no good, but he enters with 3 counters, and then whenever he enters or attacks, he creates a number of 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens equal to its power. So he comes in with 3, and then you can pay 2, sacrifice another artifact to put a 1/1 counter on him. He's really good. He's basically, in my head, I guess he's like a mere Battlesphere with more upside. Functionally, you can read him like that. Triplicate Titan is also another big stink, just like Phyrexian Triniform. Flying, Vigilance, Trample, and then when he dies, you make a 3/3 flyer, 3/3 Vigilance, 3/3 Trampler. He's great. Again, the same logic. We loop him. He dies. We sacrifice, I don't know, the one with Trample or whatever. And then we reanimate the big 9/9, which is great. And then the final one is Wormcoil Engine. Same kind of logic. Death Touch, Lifelink, 6/6 for 6. When he dies, make a 3/3 Lifelink, make a 3/3 Death Touch. Sacrifice one of them to Daretti, reanimate Wormcoil Engine. He's just back. Going into Sorceries, we have All is Dust. Each player sacrifices all colored permanents they control. We're a mono red deck, and I know we have a good amount of colored permanents, but we're mostly an artifact deck, which are not colored. Which is really good. So we'll lose a little bit on this, but our opponents will lose like basically everything. So super good card. Electro Duplicate. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it has haste, and at the beginning of your end step, sacrifice this creature, and it has flashback so we can do it again. really good. Again, like imagine like you're doing this on like a Phyrexian Triniform, or even if you're just doing it on Daretti and killing off the legend rule and making the token die right away to just get the enter trigger to happen. It's still really good. Faith in the flashback I'll talk about in a second. Faithless Looting, it just helps fills our grave, fills our hand, filters our hand, which is great. Draw 2, discard 2, put big stinky artifacts into the graveyard we can reanimate later. And the fact that they both have flashback is really, really good because we do fill our grave kind of frequently. So if they are in our grave, we still get more options later on. Gamble is a win-win. It's not even a gamble. We're searching our deck for a card and putting it into our hand and then discarding a card at random. We're probably getting up an artifact. So we're either tutoring an artifact straight to our grave or we're tutoring an artifact straight to our hand. Either way, not bad. Molten Duplication, just a cheaper version of the Electro Duplicate. Just create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature you control. It's an artifact, gains haste until end of turn, sacrifice it. Functionally the same thing, it just costs less. Scrap Mastery is Daretti's staple card. Each player exiles all artifact cards from his or her graveyard and then sacrifices all artifacts he or she controls and then puts all cards he or she exiled this way onto the battlefield. You're doing the old switcheroo. It's really good. We fill our grave. A good Scrap Mastery will end the game. Trash for Treasure is a baby Scrap Mastery. It's basically Daretti's ability, just on a sorcery, as an additional cost, sack an artifact, return an artifact card from our grave to the field. It's good in a pinch. It's just good, honestly, overall. Going into Instants, we have Big Score. A lot of our card draw is going to be cards like Big Score, where it's discard a card to draw 2 cards and then make 2 treasure. Discarding a card is great because we're going to have so many high CMC cards in our hand that we're never going to cast, like, we're not going to cast, like, Phyrexian Triniform from our hand. He just costs 9 mana. We're not going to do it, right? We'll definitely reanimate him at any given opportunity, but, like, it's just better to have what we're doing from our hand be good utility and setup. So discarding like a big artifact and then just drawing 2 cards and making 2 treasures, which we can then use to sacrifice one of those treasures to Daretti to reanimate that big guy we discarded. Big Score is really, really good. Chaos Warp, just to get rid of a permanent. We don't have a ton of ways to answer permanents. We have like Meteor Golem will answer non-land permanents like the Spider and Duplicate will deal with creatures. But this is really good just to deal with like lands or enchantments or whatever, right? Deflecting SWAT is good just so we can keep Daretti alive. If someone tries to kill him, we kill something else. Demand Answers as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice an artifact, or discard a card. Which is good. We're either sacrificing an artifact, which typically isn't that big of a deal, or we can discard a card, which is also fine because we want to fill our grave just to draw 2 cards. Electric Revelation, again, same kind of logic. Discard a card, reanimate it later, draw 2 cards, and then it also has flashback just like the other 2, so we could always just, do it later. Kazul's Fury. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature. This instant deals damage equal to the sacrifice creature power to any target. The way I think about this card is like with like Ancient Stone Golem, or Idol, or whatever his name is. Ancient Stone something. Where you fling them and they just take 12 damage. Like you're just dealing 12 damage directly to someone. Or let's say we attack with like a Phyrexian Triniform and then someone takes 9 damage and then we Kazul's Fury and then we fling it at instant speed and then they take another 9 damage and then we get 3 3/3s, which is also really good. And then it's also just a land on the back, which is still fine. Thrill of Possibility is probably the worst of the instant discard a card, draw a card, but it is the OG instant discard a card, draw 2 cards like that. And then Unexpected Windfall is the same exact card as Big Score. Going into artifacts, we have Arcane Signet just because it's good to have that little bit of ramp. Brass's Tunnel Grinder is super great, does exactly what the deck wants to do. Enters the battlefield, discard any number of cards, and then draw that many +1. And then at the beginning of our end step, if we descended, which we'll probably do every turn, we put a board counter on it. If there's 3 more board counters, it flips over to Tech Cutlin, the Searing Rift, taps for a red, and then whenever you cast a permanent spell, you basically discover X, where X is a CMC. So it's just a good artifact that we can like loop to constantly filter our hands, or when we need be, or like eventually, it's just a land that basically gives us Cascade. Chamil the Inner Sun, to have spells you control can't be countered. Eventually, we're going to get to the point in the game where we're going to have these really big artifacts that like we want to cast that we don't want to get countered. We don't want to pay like, eventually, like I know we want to reanimate, right? But eventually we're going to get to the point in the game where we're going to get so much mana and just be like, okay, well I have like 8 mana. Why don't I cast Platinum Emporium? We don't want them to be like, yeah, just counter that your turns basically. Like, lost all your mana for nothing. So No more countering spells. And then at the beginning of our end step, we get free Discover 5, which is also really nice to help fill our hand or fill our grave or just advance our board. Cursed Mirror is super good. It's just a mana rock, and then as it enters the battlefield, you may have it become a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it gains haste, which is really good because we can just have it copy one of our big stinky creatures, or we could just have it be a rock if we need it. Either way, really, really good. Ichor Wellsprings, an absolute staple in any like Daretti deck. It's just when it enters, draw a card, you sacrifice it with Daretti, you draw another card. You want to loop it back to the field and sacrifice a token? Why not? You just keep drawing cards. KCI is good, just short, sweet, to the point. Sacrifice an artifact, add 2 mana. We can start sacrificing, like guys at instant speed. Let's say someone wants to exile, like Phyrexian Triniform is like my go-to example. Someone wants to exile it, we can be like, oh yeah, instead we're just going to sacrifice it, get the 3 golems, and we'll just get 2 mana. And so instead of it being exiled, it's just in the grave. Or if we're just like, yeah, it's early game, I don't really need like all like this Lightning Greaves anymore. Like I can just sacrifice Lightning Greaves and get 2 mana. So it's pretty good. Lightning Greaves is great. We probably don't want to sacrifice it, but we just slap it on Daretti. He gets haste and shroud, can't be targeted. He enters the battlefield. We do a reanimate, equip these sneakers to him. Attack, reanimate again. Easy. Liquid Metal Torque is fine. It's just we can just tap it to add a colorless, and then we could also tap it to make a non-land permanent become an artifact in addition to its other types. So in like a scenario where we're like, we don't really have any artifacts that we do want to like get rid of, like we could just be like, oh well, here's like Feldon, like we can make him an artifact and like sacrifice it. Or it's still good to make things into artifacts. It's never a bad thing, and it's always just a rock. Mind Stone is not very exciting. It just taps for a colorless, and then we can pay 1, tap it, sacrifice it, and draw a card. It's good. We can like reanimate it with like Goblin Engineer and stuff like that. Now, Mindslaver is an exciting card because we can go infinite with this card very, very easily. Not infinite, but we can at least lock a player out of the game. 6 mana, we're probably not going to cast it. 4 mana, tap it, sacrifice it. You control target player during that player's next turn. So ideally, we're just going to, on our turn, do a Daretti loop, sacrifice, like play an artifact, sacrifice an artifact, bring back Mindslaver, pay 4, tap it, take that player's turn, do nothing on their turn except make it terrible for them. It goes back to our turn, reanimate Mindslaver, continue it. Super gross, super cool. Palantir of Orthanc, I kind of have the same logic I have with Combustible Gearhulk. At the beginning of your end step, put an influence counter on it, and then scry 2. Target player may have you draw a card, and if they don't, you mill X cards, and where X is the number of counters on it, and they lose life equal to the total CMC of the milled cards. And again, when we have cards like Ancient Stone Idol, that's like 10 mana, or Metalwork Colossus, that's like 10 mana, or like the Triplicate Titan, or like Tritiform, whatever, like they don't, when they know we have these big CMC cards, they're not going to be like, yeah, you can mill 3 and I'll just hope for the best. They'll just be like, yeah, just draw a card. So functionally, we're just going to look at this as at the end of our turn, we're just going to scry 2 and draw a card, basically forever. No one's going to let us mill. And if they do, they're going to learn the hard way. Portal to Phyrexia, one of the best cards. We just enters the battlefield. Each opponent sacks 3 creatures. Great. And then at the beginning of upkeep on our turn, we reanimate a creature from any graveyard, which is really good. Sculpting Steel enters the battlefield as a copy of any artifact on the battlefield. Probably one of ours. Probably Portal to Phyrexia, if I could pick. But yeah, it's just whatever the best artifact on the field is. We now have 2 of them. Because we probably have the best. Soul Ring is Soul Ring is Soul Ring is Soul Ring. Spine of Isham, when it enters the battlefield, pop target non-land permanent, and then if it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return it to our hand. So we can start casting it from our hand. We can start just like, if we mill it, we can reanimate it. We can't exactly like loop it, but like we'll always have an option from our hand just to pop a permanent, which is good. The Mightstone and Meekstone is also great. We don't have Urza to go along with it, but when it enters the battlefield, we either draw 2 cards or just kill a creature. And then it's functionally, for this deck, it's a mana rock that taps for 2 mana, which is really good because even if like we want to loop it, honestly, like drawing 2 cards or killing a creature, because -5/-5 will kill most creatures, it's still really good. It's just a good rock. Going into enchantments, we only have a few. We have Artist Talent. The main reason we want Artist Talent is for the top one. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. We want to be doing a lot of looting, and then we can have non-creature spells cost 1 less. We're probably not going to do the level 3 ability. It just doesn't make too much sense in this deck, but the first 2 levels are definitely what we want. Blood Moon is fantastic. We are a mono red deck. All of our lands are mountains anyways. We don't really care. It's just going to shut down our opponents and make them hate us. Sneak Attack is really good. And again, I keep using the same example. You pay 1 mana, put target Triplicate Titan from our hand onto the battlefield, or Phyrexian Triniform. It's now a 9/9 attacker, and then we sacrifice it, and then it replaces itself with all of the bodies. So really, really good. And then we can just reanimate it next turn with Daretti, which again, it's just good for cheesing cards into play. Fable of the Mirror Breaker is the final enchantment. It just, when it enters, we make a 2/2 shaman, and then whenever he attacks, we make a treasure, which is great because we can just sacrifice that treasure token to do a little reanimate with Daretti. And then we may discard up to 2 cards, and if we do, draw that many cards, which is also really good because we filter our hands. And then the third form is we flip it over into the Reflection of Kiki-Jiki, which is literally Kiki-Jiki's ability, but it costs 1 mana. And he doesn't have haste. So either way, still really, really good. Going into lands, we don't have anything too crazy. We have Ancient Tomb, because on a very bad end, we can't play Daretti. We still need to be able to cast our high CMC cards. So getting 2 colorless is pretty good at the cost of 2 life. Arena of Glory is good. It enters tapped unless we have a mountain. Taps for a red, and then we can pay red and tap it to exert it to get 2 red, and then if mana is spent to cast a creature, it gains haste. So we can exert it to basically give Daretti haste, or if we divide that 2 red between 2 creatures, we can give 2 creatures haste until end of turn. So Daretti would enter, get the loop, and then attack, get the loop. Buried Rune is fine. It's just sacrifice it, return target artifact card from our graveyard to our hand. It's good in a pinch. It's just good in a pinch. Cavern of Souls is what I was kind of saying earlier. We could say Goblin. We could say Artificer. Either way, we don't want Daretti being countered. I would even just say Artificer, honestly, because it catches like Goblin Welder, Goblin Engineer, catches Daretti, catches Feldon, like all of our like utility guys like that. It makes them uncounterable. Darksteel Citadel, it's indestructible, which doesn't really matter. It's more or less an artifact land, so later in the game we can just sacrifice an artifact land if we don't want to kill tokens or whatever. Fomori Vault lets us pay 3, tap it, and discard a card to look at the top X, where X is the number of artifacts we control. Put 1 in the hand, rest on the bottom. It's basically like a super scribe pretty much, and we get to keep one of them. Great Furnace, same logic as Darksteel Citadel. It's just an artifact land. It's good. Inventor's Fair, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 3 or more artifacts, which we almost always will, we gain a life, and then we can pay 4 mana, sack it, tutor up an artifact card, and reveal it, and we can only do it if we have 3 or more artifacts, which again, we almost always will. Power Depot is a really interesting one. Artifact land, which again, same logic as Great Furnace. We can tap it for any color to cast artifacts. Doesn't really matter too much because we are a mono color deck, but it does have modular, which means it enters with a counter. So if we choose to sack Power Depot to like Daretti or whatever, we just move a 1/1 counter onto an artifact creature, which is just kind of a little added benefit. Reliquary Tower to give us no max hand size. Treasure Vault because it's also an artifact land, and in a pinch we can also just dump a ton of mana into it to make a ton of treasure tokens, which we can just then later choose to reanimate with Daretti, or just ramp kind of on someone's end step. Either way, it's good. And finally, we have 23 mountains for a total of 34 lands with 1 MDFC for a max total of 35. I do like these gold border cards. Apparently, they look really, really nice in person. I think these are called like the cockpit driver or like the driving seat like art. I don't know. I think they're kind of neat, but I do like the gold border. What do you guys think of the gold border? I like them. Either way, that's enough mountains for the deck. That's all I got. Thank you guys for watching. As always, get the cards you need from the link down below, and just remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you think of the deck, and I will see you guys next time.